Hello and welcome back to my channel, Bookish Lady Night, where we get a look behind the book. Today I am joined by ELAYNA Gailey. She is the mastermind behind the elaborate world of the Republic of Balance, where all three eras of stories take place. And if you haven't read them, the first ones that I read were the Binding Chronicles, and I have my books here. These are actually the older covers. She has a newer, updated cover available. And then I fell in love with the Choosing Chronicles. I think those books were absolutely amazing. But her newest release is out now, and it's called Troubled. And so thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. I love this whole world, so I'm so pleased to be able to talk about it.
It's amazing. I found you first on Tethered, and I actually did it as an ARC read, and I loved it. And so then I started to look into you and going down there, and then I noticed you started coming out with other books, and I was like, wait, they're interconnected. I was like, this is so cool. So I love that. And the fact that you made this whole world with different eras and different storylines, and they all have touches to each other that if you've read the other books that you pick up those Easter eggs is just phenomenal. I don't know how you did that. Your brain is really awesome.
Thank you.
So
yeah, I didn't really set out to write a whole world, but it just started sort of unfurling, and I'm really happy with where it's gone.
So what inspired you to start this whole world to begin with?
Yeah, I started writing Tethered because the first book, the first series that I wrote in this world is the Athenmere Chronicles. And I actually started writing Tethered because Athenmere is really dark, and it's a lot darker than Tethered is. And I needed a break from the darkness. And so I thought, what could be more delightful than a vampire prince who's tied to a human? And so that was my break. And so that came to me when I was in the middle of the second book of Wings and Briars. And so if you go back and read OAB, there's some nods to what is going to start happening in Alita, because that's when it all started coming to me. So it started there, and then it just sort of bloomed from there to the rest of it.
And it's funny. I haven't read the other series yet. I have it. I just haven't started yet. But it's funny you say that, because when I was new, I've read before, but I was newer to reading, and the queen in this book is terrible.
Yeah.
She is horrible. And so it does have dark vibes, even though it's not your darkest book you've written. But I hate her. She was the perfect villain. Seriously, the perfect villain. And even jealous that you write a really good, bad, mean, awful character. You really do good at that. You just hate them.
Those are one of my favorites. I love writing villains. I have a lot of fun writing a really good villain. My favorite parts about villains are I think that every villain has to have a reason that they are the way that they are. And so the best villains have relatable reasons. I think that you can see how they got from point A to point B, and then
you definitely really, especially with Jealousette, and I'm not going to give anything away because I don't like spoiling anything, but with her, you could totally see why she was crazy lady. But then it just went into a whole other level of crazy. And so you do really well with that. You feel for them, and then you're like, no, I don't. Never mind. I don't feel for you. So it's good.
When I wrote A Harder Desire and Deceit, I wrote Jelisette's story at the same time. It actually felt so bad for the reason that she becomes the way that she is, because I really like her partner. I really liked him when I met him, and then I was like, oh, this is even worse. But it makes sense for who she is. So it was definitely relatable.
Yeah, no, it was great. The dichotomy of the two, for sure. You just love this one, and then over here you're with the other one. But you can totally see what happens and why it happens. It's just sad. It's really sad. But then you just really, you don't like her. It was so well done. It was so well done. And I loved the first book. The whole fake dating, the Bachelor vibes. It was it was so cute. It was so cute. I just loved how you tied that together and made it with mythical creatures and mythical things, and it was just wonderful.
I had so much fun with that.
So how did you pick the location when you were coming up? Did that world just come to you, or did it just kind of piece itself together as you were writing the characters?
Part of it depends. Like, I actually really hate being outside. And it's so funny because of Earth and Flame, if I had to like go count, it's like 80% of the whole book takes place outdoors. And then as I was like writing that, and I knew that Alita was going to be like super cold because in my head it's like really northern.
Mhm.
And so I had already like started forming this sort of situation in my head. But for the most part, the settings come to me like after the characters start talking to me. So if a character doesn't talk to me, then they like I can't really tell their story because I don't know where they are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So when you're getting your characters, do they just kind of like pop in and say like, "Hi, I'm Luna. Hi, I'm Sebastian," or did you have like something that you saw that like triggered it?
Yeah, for the most part, they have to come and talk to me, but they don't always talk or they don't tell me enough about themselves. Like Sebastian, usually they start talking when they get the chance to walk onto the page and have their POV. Like when I first met Sebastian in his first chapter, I messaged my writing group and I was like, you guys aren't going to believe this because he's actually really nice and like a total cinnamon roll. And it was really surprising to me because they don't really like tell me that much about themselves until they get the chance to be on the page. But I do like have the general understanding of them before I start writing for them.
That's really great. I love Sebastian.
Me too.
He's great. So when you start writing a new book or like these books, did you have like a mood board or did you make like a goal of like what you wanted or like an outline, I guess, would also
Yeah,
be.
that's a really good question. I'm a total pantser as a writer, so it's very rare for me to have an understanding of the plot as I go into it, and most things reveal themselves to me as I write. There are certain things that I know that the characters have already told me, like going in. And so, for example, I'm writing A Curse of Stars and Storms right now, which is River and Nick's story, like the first half of it. And I already know like one place where they're going to be, and so I have like they have already like told me this, but all the way like to get there is not there, and then I sort of know how the first half of their story is ending, but like the rest of the journey doesn't exist until we walk through it together to get there. And it's like it either feels right or it doesn't, and if it doesn't feel right, then it's not the right way.
I'm so excited for her story, especially the way you ended it in book 2. And I was like, oh, please tell me that's coming soon.
We pick up with River and Nick like a year and a half ish after Riker and Brinley's story, but right
Uh-huh.
at where the epilogue of Riker and Brinley's story is where River and Nick's story starts. So we get to like
Yeah.
pick up right from there.
Yeah, that'll be awesome to read. So, when you are, working on this story, do you know like when you're having cliffhangers? Are they like you already know they're there, or they just kind of like walk up on you?
It depends. I didn't actually think the cliffhanger for A Game of Love and Betrayal was bad until I like sent it to my beta readers and they were all like, this is awful. And I actually left it the way that it was, but I didn't think that it was that bad of a cliffhanger. No, I just know like I can generally feel where this is the end of a story, or like this is the end of like this part of the story. And stories just generally vibe for me. Like
Yeah,
Given is vibing like 4 books. I don't know if it's going to be 4 books, but I feel like there is. I do not know what books 2, 3, and 4 will have, but they just like have that feeling
the
of 4.
feeling. Yeah. No, like yes, you definitely like I was like when I finished it, I was like, no. So I agree with them, but it was good. It wasn't too like it was just more like but it wasn't like rip my heart out like
Mm-hmm.
I can't go on, but it was definitely a good spot. But you definitely left me with like 50 billion questions running through my mind of like what the heck is going on.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very good. It was very, very good.
Cute.
So I'm gonna scroll down on my questions here. Sorry. So with writing as much of you as you have done, do you have like something that you do to celebrate the milestones you've accomplished?
I mean, it depends on like what it is. For me, a lot of times, like a book is a big deal, but I usually break them into like smaller chunks for the way that my brain works. So I usually celebrate like every step with my husband. Like if a draft is done, And then I have like a really big edit, and that's like the biggest edit, and that's like the most arduous part of editing. So I usually have like 3 celebrations, because then I celebrate that one, and then when the book like finally gets to come out, then that one is like a really big deal too. So we like do some fun stuff. We might go for a dinner and that kind of stuff, but it's really exciting. It's always nice to release a book. Sometimes it feels like I've been having the story for so long, and now I get to share it with everyone else.
Yeah, it's probably cathartic and a little bit probably scary at the same time, because it's like your baby and you're like sending him out into the world.
Yeah, absolutely. There is something scary about it. It has not gotten easier for me as I like go about it. If anything, it's a little like more, it feels like there's more pressure the more that I do it, but I do really enjoy it.
Yeah. Did you always want to be a writer?
No, I didn't. I mean, I've read forever, but then actually in the middle of the pandemic, we moved across provinces, because I'm Canadian. So we moved like across 2 provinces blind. We didn't even see our house except for a video before we bought it, but we like sold our house in Ontario, and then we picked up and we moved across 2 provinces, and then we moved here. And that was like really good for a lot of reasons, because just like putting space between us and like some toxic people was really helpful. And then we moved, and a couple months later I was like, I think I'm going to try to write a book. And my husband was like, yeah, you should do that, because he's super supportive. And I did. And the moment that I like started to write, it was like meant to be. Yeah.
So do you do this now full time?
Yeah, I'm a full-time author, which is super cool and very exciting. Yeah.
Congratulations. That's really cool.
Thank you.
So what was a moment that you can look back on and say like you were really proud? Is there any moment that like really stands out to you?
Oh, that's such a good question. For me, like there are so many really strong moments. I think recently I would say putting Troubled out into the world felt really good. I've had like other launches that were really good, but for some reason this one for me was like, it just felt really special. And because part of it is like the end of the second era, I'm probably not going back to write in this one, at least not anytime soon. And so there were a lot of emotions attached to it, but also like I feel like everyone there who has wanted to tell me their story now has their story told. And that was like a really special feeling. So I really, really was proud of that.
Yeah, and that's Luna's brother, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so excited. I'm about to start it. I had 2 other books I had to finish, but I was like, I want to know, because like you hear about him in these books, you know, her quest for him.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, it'll be so great to like have it all wrap around and like have that closure of like knowing.
Yeah. And
story.
Trouble takes place like over a decade after the end of Treasured. So everyone else has sort of like settled into their roles. The balance has been like restored. And so the Republic of Balance is a nod to A Thin Mirror when the balance is broken. And that's where actually like the darkness comes from. So the thing with Queen Marguerite is that she was like totally nuts, but also the darkness was a real thing. And then she did like have a reason to be concerned about it, but maybe just like not the way that she did it. So in Troubled, the balance has been restored and everyone is like living a mostly happy life. And so it's really nice to like go back and see some old friends and make some new ones. And we get to travel to some like really interesting places in the 4 Kingdoms as well.
I'm excited. I'm very excited to read it. So within writing, does it energize you or does it make you tired?
I love it. I actually write like first thing in the morning. That's the way that I start at my day. So I always get up earlier than my kids are 10 and 14. So I get up around like 5:30, 6, and I'll always write, even just for like 500 words, just to like get something on the page, basically, to start my day off. But it's one of my favorite parts of my day.
So do you have like a goal when you're writing? Like you said 500, but like on an ideal day, do you have like a certain word count or like a certain chapters or scenes you try to get done?
If I'm actively writing, then I usually will write between like 2,000 to 3,000 words a day is like a good day. I can do more, but I don't love pushing too far. And then if I'm like, right now I'm not actively writing. I don't say I'm kind of in between because Given is with beta readers. And so I'm like, A Curse of Stars and Storms is my side piece until Given is like done. And then it gets bumped up. So like when it gets bumped up, then it'll get like a lot more words. But for the most part, if I'm not actively writing, then I'm happy with anything, if I am actively writing, it's going to be 2,000 to 3,000 words.
Yeah, I'm excited to read Given.
Thank
I
you.
think it's going to be really, really good. So how long does that process take once you've like handed it over to them and then you like get it back and you're doing like more edits or like anything that they like recommend or something?
Yeah, some of them have already started to come back, but it usually takes, like, I usually will step aside from the manuscript for at least 2 weeks, and then I'll come back and then bring everything in. And the thing with beta readers is you can't, like, there's just a lot of balance. So sometimes I'll like read over everything, I'll make some changes, and I'll like go to them and sometimes ask for clarification, like, did you mean this? What do you think about this? And then after that, it gets like more editing, and for about like a month is what it'll have after, and then it's going to like a line editor at the end of January. Yeah.
So when you are writing and now you've been a writer, if you could go back in time, like in a time machine, and like talk to your younger writing self, would there be anything that you would tell yourself knowing what you know now?
That's such a good question. I mean, like, everyone makes mistakes, and as like a young writer, I did the same thing too. I think that I would say that I got some like pretty not great advice from people in the past, and that's only because every person is different, and so every writer is different. And so I'd probably tell myself to like trust my gut more and not rely so much on like what other people do, because everyone's process is different. Yeah.
Really good advice. Yeah, because it's probably, was it like a little bit like imposter syndrome? So you were trusting their advice because you weren't sure?
Yeah, like that's imposter syndrome is still something that I think that everyone struggles with. Like I still have days where it's like really a lot. But for the sometimes, especially when it comes to writing advice, there are some writers who like to like give advice and they're like, this is the only way to do it. And that like that advice didn't work for me. And so that would make me feel like I was doing something wrong. But that's not true. It's just like that everyone's process is different.
Yeah. Yeah. So since you have books that have mythical creatures and different beings, I always like to ask this for my fantasy writers, is if you could be any mythical creature or being, what would you be and why?
Oh, that's such a good question. I really love vampires. I think that they are my favorites. They're my favorite ones that I've written thus far. So I think that that's what I'm going to choose, a vampire. But truly, I love so many different mythical creatures for so many different types of reasons. Probably really close behind would be a dragon shifter, because I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, that would be so cool. And I love vampires. My mom's so funny because she's always like, "Are you reading another vampire book?" And I'm like, because I've liked them since I was little. I've had a very weird obsession with vampires my entire life. So like your books, like my perfect thing. So I love that. So what is the most difficult thing about writing for you?
Yeah, oh, that's such a good question. Sometimes it's hard when I get close to the end of a story and it's in my head and I can't like physically get it all out of my head all at once. But those that last third of a story can weigh really heavily on me until I get it out. So sometimes it can be difficult to have so many voices and like so much of a story just waiting to be told, but it doesn't last because I can get it out and then we feel better. So it's just about like getting to that point.
Getting to that point, yeah. So on the flip side, what is your favorite thing about writing?
I love getting to tell stories. I think it's so much fun. I love the stories that I get to tell, and I love that I get to be like, what if this crazy thing happens? And then people are like, yes, tell me all about this.
Yeah.
That's really, it's such an honor to be a storyteller, and I can't believe that that's what I get to do.
It's wonderful. That I love that. And I love, like, I have this shirt and I feel like it's perfect for your book, so I'm gonna stand up a little bit. So it's like a reader gets to live 1,000 lives, and that's so true.
I love that.
With your books, because you have so many different points of view and different characters and different beings, and it kind of represents, even though it's a fantasy world, it represents our world, because you put, heavy topics in there, and there's, not just the romance, but there's like the political, there's like usually a battle, there's like deep emotions and trauma, and it's like all in there together, and so it kind of reflects our world in a lot of ways. So
yeah, absolutely. I think that sometimes we forget that like fantasy can be so rooted in reality, and it can also be like such a good escape, not only for us as readers, because of course, like I'm a reader too, but as a writer, getting to write things helps process through a lot of things that happen around us too. So definitely they have like those moments that reflect our real world.
Yeah. And so when you're writing, so like the Choosing Chronicles, for
Mm-hmm.
example, that's the one I most recently read. That's in third person dual
Mm-hmm.
POV. Do you struggle with writing that versus writing it more in a first person, or do you do that set up to give more of a broad spectrum around so people have more context?
Every story has like a vibe to it, and it just like only wants to be told in that POV. So I originally started writing Agalab in first person, but it wasn't working right. And then when I went back and I switched it into third, then it was working properly. So there are just like some stories, and actually Given is in first person present tense. So it's like right now happening.
Yeah.
Every story just like wants to be told differently.
Yeah.
And I'm such a huge pantser that I go with the vibes. Like I'm a mood reader, and I call myself like a mood writer too. So I don't really stick to one POV like across, yes, across like obviously A Curse of Stars and Storms is going to follow the same as like Agala because it's the same like series and the same
Yeah.
setup. But it does depend on the individual books and the
Individual.
way that they want to have their story told.
That's really fascinating. I love both types. I usually read more in like first person, like,
Mm-hmm.
but I do like the aspect of third where you get more of the world around you
Mm-hmm.
and you get like a bird's eye view. So I like that also because then I feel like I'm seeing more that like maybe I didn't notice if I was reading it in first person. So what is the most difficult thing about writing the opposite sex for you?
That's such a good question. I really love writing male POVs. I think it's super enjoyable for me. Sometimes I think that it can be hard to put myself into their shoes until I get to know them a little bit more. And actually, it's interesting because none of my books that have alternating POVs start with a male POV and on the first book, and none of them like go right into the second chapter. There's always at least like two POVs, sometimes a little bit more, like two chapters in the female POV before it switches. And a lot of that is because they're like, it just takes me a little bit longer to get into their heads
Mm-hmm.
and for them to like be able to talk to me, and it doesn't always feel right for them to like start right away. In for Xander and Ileana, he doesn't have a POV in A Birth and Flame because there's like a lot of secrets that he's keeping, and there was like no way for him to be able to talk without like revealing a lot of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like for this one, especially like this one, like the first chapter,
Mm-hmm.
you're from her point of view, and she's like talking about like how he's like, she's like, I don't know about this guy. Like this guy is very like, I'm believing all of the things that have ever been whispered about this guy. And
Yeah.
no. And then you like get into his mind and you're like, whoa. So you could definitely see that in this, like where you started and then where it went.
Mm-hmm.
It was really cool. Like,
Thank you.
I love Smack.
Yeah, I think he's such a good character. He's definitely like a good example of a character who like everyone thinks he is this one thing, but then he is a lot more than what they're like originally saying about him.
Lots of layers
Mm-hmm.
that you peel back and show
Yeah.
us. So what's the hardest type of scene for you to write?
The nice ones, the ones where they're just like everyone is happy and or like they're having a happy moment. I do really well, like for the same reason that I'm really good with the villains. I do really well with like the most traumatic devastating scenes, but the ones where everyone is like super happy, those aren't always my favorite. Like they are my favorite to write emotionally, but they usually take longer to write because they're not as traumatic, and so they just like don't come as easily. There's not that many happy moments that happen between all the
so when you get to those moments you're like
yeah.
So yeah, I definitely think you have a very good grasp of like pulling the emotional heartstrings and like letting it out and like letting it fester and then watching them grow. For sure you have that down. And like your inner dialogue, the banter between everybody is phenomenal, but the inner dialogue that you do of them like fighting with themselves or like fighting with the situation is really well done.
Thank you.
For sure. So I really enjoy that. So you do both sides and it's really great. So out of your male characters, who's your favorite?
That's such a hard question. I don't know if I could pick a favorite because they all speak to me so differently. Alien and Xander's story is the one of my heart. And so I always tell people that like this is a story that I wrote way too close to home. And every writer does this where they write a story and it's like super emotional and it's kind of an accident how much of yourself you put into it. So obviously I'm super connected to their story. And that's one of the reasons why I won't go back to write it, because I just like every time I even think about the ending of their book and like the end books in their series, it's really emotional because there's just so much in there. But if I had to pick one, I don't even know because they're all like talking to me and being like, pick me, pick me. I'm not sure that I can pick just one because I enjoy them all for like different reasons and different like parts of their personalities.
So out of all of your books, the two they're the most like you think, as if you had to pick one of your characters?
If I had to pick, okay, so I do put parts of myself in all of my characters, like, of course, because I'm writing them. Something that I always enjoy sprinkling in is like, I love putting coffee in all of my stories because that's something that I love. But if there was someone who was the most like me, I don't even think I'm that much like Eliana, but I think that her story reflects a lot of my story. I have a lot of commonalities with Luna, and so I feel like she and I would get along really well. And a lot of her internal dialogue is like, it makes sense to me. No one has met Ren yet from Given, but she's like super sarcastic and like she just really everything that goes wrong, she takes it really personally, but also hilariously. And she just gets so mad in a really relatable way, and I really love that about her too. And I feel like that's how I would react if everything in my life was like being upended. So a lot of me is in that as well, but I think like the internal parts of my mind and like just like the bookishness of Luna speaks to me significantly
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, that had me when I first read like the little blurb about the book, and I was like, she's a book nerd. I love that. So I was like, it's like me.
Yeah.
I love that. So, what's your favorite trope to write?
Enemies to lovers, like hands down, that's my favorite. And even Sebastian and Luna's story technically isn't enemies to lovers. Like I like to call it like reluctant allies to lovers because I don't think that they're like super enemies-y, but I
Yeah.
think that that's really fun. And then like a close second is a forbidden love. Like River and Nick's story is layered with so many forbidden things, and they're very loud, so they're very excited to be getting their chance to tell their story.
It's kind of like a brother's best friend kind of
Yeah.
trope, also, for
Mm-hmm.
sure, with that one. So
Yeah.
that'll be good. I love that trope. So that'll be very fun to read. And I love how you like did Easter eggs through the books for setting that one up. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to do that. Do you enjoy when you were getting done with the process, or do you start with the covers? Do you
Yeah.
enjoy that process?
I actually do like one of my first thing, and it's not a lot of authors do this, but like one of the first things that comes to me is the title. And so usually it goes like the concept, which for Sebastian and Luna was like the tethering, and then the title comes to me, and then I almost always have a cover before I'm done the first draft because I like usually draw a lot from that, and so I get those done pretty fast. Sometimes like in the case of Tethered, I ended up changing the covers because I felt like the new ones reflect like the dark fairy tale vibes, and they're just like really on market, which is important when writing is like not only my passion but also that my job. So I really wanted to get Sebastian Luna's story to as many people as I could. But the cover and the title, I usually have those like really early in the process because they're important to my process.
Yeah. And I just have to say, I love the wing.
Thank you.
That is such a great little thing you added in there. I love that. So, in your opinion, what makes a great story?
I'm like all about vibes. I'm about vibes as a reader. And I just like want somebody to tell me a fun story. And that's my most important thing when it comes to reading. I don't read exclusively fantasy romance, or like I'll dip my toe into like contemporary or paranormal and like so many different things, but all I ask is that you tell
Yeah.
me a fun story. Like I just want to be brought along for a fun ride, and that's what I love to read. And so I love to like tell people a fun story too. That's my main goal.
So what are some of your favorite books or authors that you've had over the years?
I knew this was going to come, and it's so hard to answer because there are so many of them. One of my all-time favorites is Outlander, because that's one of the books that I read when I got back into reading. Outlander was like one of the very first books. The whole series, I read them in like 2 months, and I think there were 7 of them at that point. That was a lot. It was a lot of reading, and I like immerse myself in them. And so I will never say that like I can't speak badly about them, because I love them so much.
Yeah.
I love Outlander. I am such a Hobbit girly too. I read that when I was so much younger. And it's one of my favorites. And it's so hard to pick like a favorite. Recently, one of my favorite fantasy romance series is Trial of the Sun Queen. I actually have had the most amazing opportunity to beta read the whole series. It's been like such a fun experience, and I love that series so much. And there's so many more. I mean, like, I just love reading so much. When I'm not writing, I'm reading. So I don't think I could pick like more favorites, but there are so many.
Yeah. I actually just got that
It's so good.
on Audible because I had like the free credit and everybody's been talking about it, and I was like, I'm just gonna get it. So that next time I'm in the car and I'm driving, I'm gonna listen to that because everybody has been raving about that book. So I'm excited to listen to that one for sure. So what is the most surprising thing that you have learned on your writing journey?
That's such a good question. I never considered myself to be like able to tell stories until I started doing it. And so learning that about myself, like learning that I had a lot of stories to tell, that was really surprising. Yeah, one of the most surprising things for me was just like finding out that I had stories to tell. And then not only that, but then like people want to read my stories. That's really cool. That's something I never really expected to happen. Like I was over the moon when 100 people read my first book. And then like just the way that when Tethered started doing really well, and I was like, I couldn't even believe it. And so just like it's been so surprising to learn like how much I guess that I have like to contribute creatively.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's definitely is a very cool feeling probably to like have that full circle of
Yeah.
like you start it, you don't really know what's going to happen with it. You're doing it for yourself, but then you're like, I'll publish it. So how did that process go for you being, self-publishing and doing
Yeah.
that on your own?
As soon as I like figured out that I was writing a book, it didn't take me long to like look into what are the different publishing avenues, and I'm very controlling, and so it was not difficult for me to choose to go indie because I really like to have my finger on like all the things, and I like to do all the things as well. So it wasn't even a choice, like not really for me to try to go trad, because I knew right away that I wanted to be indie.
Yeah. Has it been a big learning curve?
Oh yeah. There's like a million things. Being an indie author is like being a publishing house. Like there are so many things that I never would have even known that like had to be done, but they do. And then like there are things like designing covers and marketing, and like there's just things that I never would have thought that that's something that I would be doing, or like learning about audiobooks and all of these things, or like how to format a book. There's a million different things that I did not know, and now I do know, and it's just been a really cool process.
First two books I own them on Audible. Are you doing the third one?
Do you mean for Tethered? Yeah, Tethered, Tormented, and Treasured are out on audio. And then Troubled is being produced. It's with Podium. Yeah.
I didn't know this one was out on Audible.
Yeah.
I looked for it because I listened to the other two and I was like, where's the third one? I'm like, oh, maybe it's not released yet. I'm going to go get it.
I think it came out in May. I might be wrong, but I think it was in May. Audiobooks tend to be like 6 months out delayed because they have to make them.
Yeah. I'm excited. Okay, I know what I'm going to go get now after I'm finished with this interview. I'm going to go buy the third one and listen to it. I've read them all, but I like listening to them.
There you go.
I don't know why. I just like hearing the voices, and then I feel like I'm in a movie, and it just is great. And I do rereads. I love rereading. my favorite books. So I definitely do that. They're like comfort reading, and you just go and live there for a little while.
Yeah, I love that.
So with your characters' personalities, do you feel like any of them are inspired by people around you?
Oh, okay. Well, that's another reason why Xander and Eliana are like so touchy. Like my husband is super grudgy, but like in a loving way. Like he's not grudgy to me, but he is just in general like that is his personality, and so I think that that's like very much reflected in Xander. And again, like I did not do that on purpose, but it was just like looking back at it, I can definitely see that. For the most part, I try not to base my main characters on real people. I will say that I have like a lot of experience with not great people, so that is probably why my villains tend to work out so well.
You have a lot of things to pull from.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, it definitely gives for good details and topics within a story when you have, unfortunately, when you have that kind of background, it definitely makes your stories more deep and layered, for sure. So what was the biggest thing that you've changed since publishing your first book to now?
There's so many things. So you can't actually read my first series anymore. It's not available. And the reason why I pulled it down at the beginning of this year was because I felt like it no longer like matched the rest of where I am as a writer. Like I feel I'm more focused now, and it was like a mismatch of genres, which happens a lot for people's debuts because you're just like pulling from stories that you love and like you're letting them inspire you. Given actually contains a lot of elements from my first story, but in my opinion, now they're being told like the way that I wanted them to be told. So if anyone did like read Sequence, which is unlikely, but if anyone did read that and then now they stuck around to read Given, there are nods to that first series in it that are saying like, hi, you probably recognize this, but now it's being told like a lot differently. And I say like Given is like Thanksgiving, but it's like dark with a really large dose of human sacrifices like sprinkled in. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited to read it. I'm excited for that one. And when is that one that you think you'll be releasing?
Given is coming. Yeah. Given's coming April 30th. And then I think that A Curse of Stars and Storms is going to come pretty soon after that, like soon bookish wise. Maybe in June. I'm not 100% certain because I have a lot of like personal things happening in April, May, and June. Like I have to be on in a lot of places. So we'll see how well they talk to me, but if not, it'll definitely be out by the release date, which is currently set for July 9th.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna hope for June because that's my birthday. So it'll be like a present to me to read the book.
I'd love to be able to get it out in June. That is like my goal, but I don't want to jinx myself. Yeah.
Because then it won't be authentic or something might be missed and then it won't be what you wanted it to be. So do you read reviews or do you just...
No. Well, I will go and read 5-star reviews, but I'm not sure if you know the GALLEA Strengths Finders, but I have a very high level of significance, and that just means like I take things really personally when it comes to reviews. And so I have read reviews in the past that have been very detrimental to me as a writer. And so now for the sake of my own mental health and also the stories that I'm trying to write, I do not read them. I do have my husband will go through a review sometimes and he'll like pull them for me to read. But in general, I do not read them because it's not really a safe place mentally.
Yeah, I always wonder about that. I don't think I would read them. Like I wouldn't want like to, because then it gets in your head, and even though that it just could have just not been the right book for them, and then you like internalize it, I wouldn't be able to with my own mental, like the way my brain works. I'd be like, I'd go down a rabbit hole and it'd be really bad. So do you do anything now? I know you said you were like more of a pantser, but do you do anything now to like improve your writing or?
Yeah, like I do. I have like a much better process now than I used to. And part of that is because like of the way that I go. So even though I am a pantser, I go through and I have like very specific steps that I like to do. So I do like this big edit that goes to betas, but then once I get it back, I do like a listening edit, and I also send myself like the PDF of the book on my iPad, and I like mark it up with like a red pen basically, and just destroy the whole thing, and then put it all back together. And so I feel like I am better at being like more focused on it now that I've done it quite a bit.
Yeah, that's great. So you said you liked The Hobbit. Did you have any other books as a child that you like really loved?
Okay, so there was this book that I read, and I think it was called The Woman in the Wall. And I cannot tell you anything about it, but I do know that it both like was super spooky and I loved it. And it's about this girl, and she lives in the walls of her house. And like her family knows that she's there. It's very strange.
Yeah.
I really liked that book.
I've heard of that.
It's very odd. And even now, I'm like, this is a really odd book. But I had a copy, and like I'd read it so many times the cover was falling off. I do not think it was like meant to be totally understood, but I really enjoyed it. But my first like big book was The Giver, and I just love The Giver so much. And I reread it recently as an adult, and I still love it. And I think that doesn't always happen when you reread childhood favorites. And I love The Giver, and I just think it is a book that I will forever remember.
Did you notice reading it back then? Because we had to read it for school. I remember that. We had to read it in school. And then now I homeschool. So I was reading it to my daughter as an adult, and I was like, you get a whole other meaning.
It was a lot darker than I remembered it being. I remembered it being something that I really found thought-provoking, but I do not remember dwelling on the dark parts as an 11-year-old reading it. But now, as an adult, like when I read it, I was like, wow, this is actually really dark. And it probably says something about me that I didn't really notice, like how dark it was when I read it the first time, that I just was like, this is such an enjoyable ride.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did really enjoy it. It's still one of my favorites.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very, very good book. So how do you show, or how do you receive like your love language?
Yeah.
Maybe a quicker way to say it.
That's such a good question. Words of affirmation are like really important for me, for the same reason that I don't read reviews, is because they touch me like really deeply. And then I also I'm a huge foodie. That's my like big love that isn't reading or writing. And so making food for my family, but also just like enjoying food, good food with people. My husband and I, when we like travel, like we base things around food. So we like go places for food, or we do things because there is like a food here that we want to do, or eat or whatever. Like that is a big part of like our time that we spend together.
Great. I'm a foodie too. I'm all about the food. I love to try, like going to traveling. Like I studied in Europe, and like I loved going to try their like authentic dishes. Like that was my favorite part, other than like the sightseeing, was because I wanted to try the food for sure. So that definitely, I get that for sure. So what is a unique or quirky fact that we maybe don't know about you?
Okay, so it's really interesting. Crochet and knit. Now I haven't like done it that much recently, but I used to be able to crochet blindfolded. I'm gonna guess that I could probably still do it, but I haven't like put it to the test in a while. But that came from having super young children and them like running around and me crocheting at the same time. So it was just like a natural evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. I love that. That's fun.
That's
like
really
people
impressive.
that can crochet, I am so jealous of you, because I'd love to do it, but my fingers are just like, yeah. I don't know how you guys do that. And to do it blindfolded, like that is a talent right there. Or to do it while you're running after children, like
yeah,
I would miss a stitch or like unravel the whole thing on the way of following whoever I was following.
Yeah.
So that's really, really cool. So given that it's the holiday season, I just threw in a couple fun questions.
Okay.
So what are some things that your family does at this time of year, or traditions that you have?
Yeah, we so it's already Thanksgiving is already passed here in Canada because it happens in October. But we always do pajamas on Christmas Eve, which I feel like a lot of people do. But then we do waffles on Christmas morning. And we like always do waffles. We've actually had power outages the last two Christmases at our house, but we still did waffles. We hooked up like the waffle maker to the generator and it did like all that stuff. Now we live where it's really cold, so when the power goes out, it's more like it's not so much of a concern for the food because we can just like keep it there, but we have a fire
Yeah.
and everything, so it was okay. But we do like waffles every year. We do like all the things, whipped cream and Nutella and like all the berries, and basically everyone has as many waffles as they can, and Christmas morning like goes underway from there.
That's cool. I love that. That's really, really cool. So in this journey of writing, has there ever been a moment where you're like, or it maybe hasn't arrived yet, where you're like, I made it. I did it. Like, have you had that moment?
That's such a good question. I've had several really cool moments that have been like, this is really cool that it's happening to me. A lot of times I still consider myself to like have a lot of places to grow, but there have been moments where I've been like, that's amazing. I really love, it really touches me when people post about my books that are not me because I feel like that is of course like part of something that I do. But when other people post about my books or they tell me that they're very excited about like a new release, those are big moments for me that feel like I have made like what I wanted to do.
Yeah. That's cool. I love these books, and I loved the Choosing Chronicles because they were like so vivid in my head like a movie. So I ended up making reels.
Mm-hmm.
I don't make reels very often. Like I do them usually if I'm doing it for like a feature of a book, or if it's like a book that really like struck me,
Mm-hmm.
because I can see it so vividly in my mind. And like I had so much fun making the reels for these because they were so vivid, and I really enjoyed that. I think that that's really, really cool, and that you have that, and that you keep having moments like that. And yeah, definitely you
Mm-hmm.
always want to keep growing. Like just as a person, I feel like you don't want to ever be stagnant, and there's always
Mm-hmm.
room to do something different or change something or expand on it for sure. So do you have plans to branch out into trying more of this universe, or doing like a new universe or different types of books?
Yeah, well, Given is in a whole new world. So it's a different universe entirely than the rest of the books. I might write in the first era again. And of course, like I have four, I feel like there's two more. There's River and Nick's story, and then Atlas and someone that I'm not sharing yet, their story as well. And so there's definitely like at least four more stories in this world.
Mm-hmm.
Difficulty like thinking too far in advance because it gets me I just like freeze up about it. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if someone else talks to me. Sometimes I have like an idea, but it depends if the idea is strong enough or if like the voices are loud enough as to whether they'll actually become like another story. So it just depends. Right now, no plans, but then also maybe a little plans. Like I guess
Yeah.
it just depends.
Do you keep them in your head, or do you like write them down just so you like can remove them?
If they are strong enough to like be written out, but I also don't like to let stories start talking to me that I'm not ready to write because then it can be a lot to balance in my head at once. So I try to only do so much. Like River and Nick have been really, really loud. And so they've like been waiting and waiting to have their story told. And given the heavy in that there's probably four parts to the story. So even though I don't know all four of them, somewhere in my brain like is piecing together the other three books. And so there's already like a lot of books happening there. But I don't know. I'm a mood writer, so I might just like pop out with something totally different one day.
That's really great. Well, I've enjoyed all the books that you've put out,
Thank you.
so that's definitely, you have a good grasp on it. So my last question for you would be, what message would you want readers to take away from after reading your—
That's such a good question. I think it's really important to me. Like, none of my characters are perfect because I think that's totally reflective of real life. But I think that like even broken people can have like someone who can be broken with them, because I think that that's like what relationships are. I don't think that like no one is going to be the perfect person for someone else, but like broken people can be broken together, and that really like get something. So I just want people to know like that their brokenness can have somebody that like works with them. And a lot of times like that's what you get in my happy endings. Like there's not, none of my vampires have kids because they cannot. So there's always like going to be these aspects of like some of them maybe will have like, if it works for them, some of my characters will have a family in the future. But it's more like I just want people to realize like, hey, there's like so much brokenness, but and in the world around us it can be really broken too. But I just want people to know like that even in the brokenness there can be like light and happiness to be found.
That's a great message to have for sure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again so much. This has been so much fun. And if you haven't read any of her books, definitely do so. There's a plethora of them, and you can pretty much read any of the eras at any time, right? You don't have to
you
go
can
in
start
order.
you can start with any series as long as you like start with book one. You can technically you can read Troubled on its own. It will stand on its own, but is really best read after Tethered, Tormented, and Treasured, because there's not like there's still world building, but you won't get as much of it if you don't read the first three books.
Yeah, and it's definitely the world building, and those are phenomenal. So definitely read those first, and you also will get little tidbits about him from those books, so you'll have a little bit more backstory for sure. I feel like that now going into it after I've read the other three. So that's really great, and I look forward to Given when it's coming out, and of course the next for River. I can't wait to see her. I love her. She's so cute.
Their story is
so cute.
So fun. I'm very excited to share it.
Yeah, that'll be very exciting. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And if you have not, follow her below. I have put the Instagram links below. Please like and subscribe. And if you have a book bestie that you think would like to learn more about her world and her writing, please share it. And then if you haven't heard of her before, congratulations. You're going to enter a really cool world with a lot of amazing books. So have fun and let me know what you think, and let her know, of course. And please join me next time as we get a look behind the book. Bye-bye.